I was 68 years old, sitting in the passenger seat of the luxury SUV my son had just bought, a smudge of cake icing still on my finger. The party at the Cherry Creek restaurant was over, and I felt the warmth of a mother thinking, "He finally cares." We were barely rolling out of the parking lot when Stephen pressed the lock. The sharp clack of the doors securing unnerved me. "Afraid I'll run away," I joked, trying to force a laugh. "My name is Eleanor Marsh, and I am 68 years old, a widow living just west of Denver. Right now. I am strapped into the passenger seat of Stephen's ridiculous, new black SUV. The leather smells expensive and tight, suffocating the last hint of the fancy perfume I put on for my birthday. There's a spot of vanilla buttercream stuck to the back of my hand, a small, sweet reminder of the night that just ended. The air in the car should have felt warm. We had just left that impossibly sleek restaurant in Cherry Creek, a private room, 20 guests, all the expensive trimmings. I was tired. Yes. But my heart was full. My rich son finally remembered me, I thought, leaning my head against the cool glass. All those years working double shifts as a night nurse felt, for a moment, validated by his success and this lavish attention. We were barely 20 feet from the curb when he did it. Not a slow, gentle locking of the doors, but a hard, aggressive clack from the central console. It was sharp, loud, and final. I jumped, adrenaline spiking the simple sugar in my bloodstream. "Afraid I'll run away?" I asked, forcing a light, teasing tone to cover the tremor that ran up my spine. Stephen didn't laugh. He didn't even offer that tight, professional smile he usually wears in public. His face was a mask of cold tension, eyes fixed straight ahead into the smear of the city lights. His knuckles were white where they gripped the steering wheel, the veins standing out like thick, blue cordage. The air in the car grew heavy, thick and silent, broken only by the whir of the climate control and the low murmur of the classical radio station he always played. Then, he reached out, stabbed the power button on the radio, and the silence became absolute. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the kind that hurts to hold, and said something that turned my blood to ice water. "Mom, I need you to listen to me seriously. I mean it. Don't go home tonight. Something is very, very wrong. And it's about your birthday." My first reaction, the muscle memory of a mother used to managing a difficult child, was indignation. "Stephen, you are 42 years old. If this is one of your over-the-top, controlling jokes, it's not funny." I tried to laugh again, a brittle, failing sound, but my eyes dropped to his hand. It wasn't just clenched. It was visibly shaking against the smooth leather of the wheel. "It's not a joke," he whispered. The sound raw. "It's Vanessa. And that lawyer, Clay." He admitted he'd walked in on a tail end of a call hours ago. He hadn't meant to listen. He just heard snippets. They were talking about tonight. Mom. They said gas poisoning. Your signature. And the nursing home. And he specifically said, "We need to transfer the assets before she changes her mind." The buttercream on my finger suddenly felt like a heavy stone. In a horrifying flash of recall, the night's pleasantness shattered. The private room was odd. The way Vanessa insisted on swapping my glass of expensive Pinot Noir for water just to be safe. The distant, speculative looks from some of my own nieces and nephews. They weren't looking at me with love. They were looking at a piece of valuable real estate, waiting for the deed to drop. Stephen pulled the SUV sharply onto the shoulder of a dark, silent street. The pavement was cold, and the trees leaned in, hiding us from the main thoroughfare. He didn't look at me, but at the unlock button on the center console, resting his thumb right above it. It was a clear, terrible ultimatum. Mum, if I open this lock right now, I know you. You'll storm into your house, demanding answers, thinking you can fix this like you fix everything. But if you trust me just this once, we're going back to the neighborhood, but we're not going inside. We're going to see if tonight was truly a birthday party or your funeral. I stared at his thumb, poised above the button that controlled my immediate freedom and, potentially, my life. I had to make the choice believe that everything, the past 2 hours of celebration, was a terrifying hallucination driven by a controlling sun, or accept that the people who had just sung happy birthday to me 5 minutes ago were planning my quiet, gas-filled demise. My heart hammered against my new dress. The engine idled. The decision hung, heavy and poisonous, in the air. In the tense, cramped silence of the SUV, my mind snatched a breath and spiraled back decades. That black luxury car was 1,000,000 miles from the life I'd actually lived. I was 29 when my husband, a coal miner, strong and quiet, died in a mine shaft accident. Just me and Stephen, a baby with his father's eyes. To survive, I became Eleanor Marsh, the night nurse at the Harbour Light Care Institute in Aurora. 2 jobs, 7 days a week, for 25 years. My youth was spent under the harsh, humming fluorescent lights of Harbour Light. I remember the endless nights, running between rooms, changing briefs, wiping fevered brows. My small frame was constantly moving, always on my feet. But I stood tall. I took every extra shift they offered to make the mortgage payment on that little house in Lakewood. My hands, still steady now, were then scarred and calloused, yet always gentle when lifting a frail body. Those hands paid the bills. Stephen was always brilliant, a quiet boy obsessed with computers and circuits. I saved pennies, actual crumpled coins, until I could buy him a second-hand, clunky computer from a pawn shop. I wanted him to have the chances his father and I never got, a way out of the working-class grind. It meant eating cold tuna fish sandwiches for a week, but I would have done anything. When he left for college, a big state tech school in California, I was so proud. I carried his graduation photo everywhere. I showed it to every single resident at Harbour Light. That's my son, I'd say, going to be an engineer. But once he left, the phone calls grew shorter. The visits home, even for the holidays, grew further apart. Then came the explosion of success, a fintech startup, a huge buyout by a major corporation. Stephen returned to Denver a millionaire, opened his own company, Skyline Ledger Systems. He bought the massive house, the flashy cars, and married Vanessa, a former financial PR woman who always looked perfectly tailored and slightly bored. I retired 3 years ago, not gracefully, but because I slipped on a wet floor in a patient's shower room. My knee buckled. The doctor, a young man who looked like he'd never seen a real callus, told me I had to stop. I took my small pension and the insurance payout and used it to finally patch the roof and replace the rusted pipes in the old Lakewood house. I lived there alone with Maple, my ancient, cranky, tabby cat. The connection with Stephen became strictly financial. He'd wire money regularly, a sizable amount, which he called support. But he rarely visited. When he did, he arrived with perfectly wrapped gifts and a rehearsed suggestion about my living situation. Mum, you shouldn't be living alone anymore. It's a burden. He'd look around the perfectly clean, but certainly dated, house. We really should talk about putting this old thing on the market. There are some excellent private nursing communities. High-end. Silver Pines is lovely. Each time, the financial gratitude I felt twisted into a deep, painful knot. I knew he was helping, but every conversation made me feel less like a mother and more like a project he needed to clear from his to-do list. I'm fine. Stephen, I like my little house. I'd insist. But he rarely listened. He was too busy being successful to hear the silent plea for respect. I started to wonder if I was his mother or just a dependent asset that needed managing. Vanessa was the polished, exterior daughter-in-law, always flowers, always the right card, always the correct, slightly too loud compliment. But she avoided any real, private moment with me. She was always on her phone, always glancing at her watch. She'd occasionally let slip little remarks that pierced my heart like tiny needles. This house is charming, Eleanor, but think what a nice chunk of change it would fetch on the open market. You could be so comfortable. I was $72,000 in the red when my husband died. I worked myself to the bone to earn the right to this small, drafty home. And now, beholden to my son's wealth. I felt my self-respect slowly eroding. I was a life of sacrifice, growing old, reliant on the money I knew he felt entitled to control. That fear, the terror of becoming a burden, made me vulnerable and easily manipulated. I realize now that was precisely what they counted on. The strangeness didn't start the night of the party. It had been building slowly, like a draft under a locked door. Now, sitting in the tense silence of the SUV, the pieces finally started to click into place, cold and sharp. It began about a month before my birthday. Stephen and Vanessa arrived with a massive bouquet of lilies and a thick folder of papers. They called them proactive documents, things we should just get done early, for peace of mind. It's just a health check and medical power of attorney. Mom, Stephen explained, flashing his practiced, calming smile. At your age, you really should have someone designated to make decisions. I barely skimmed the pages, thick with small, dense type. Why read it all? He was my son. I trusted him. But I remember the jarring words, full power of attorney and cognitive incapacitation. I signed where he pointed, the pen feeling heavy in my hand. A few days later, they took me to see a new neurologist, Dr. Hawkins. The office felt cold and new. Dr. Hawkins was young and brisk. He gave me a memory test, asking convoluted questions about current events and dates. Every time I paused, struggling to pull a specific name from the deep recesses of my mind, he'd cut me off with a quick, slow response. Vanessa sat in the corner, not offering comfort, but typing furiously on her phone, presumably noting down my slow responses. Why didn't I question that I felt like a specimen? Not a patient. One late evening, I heard Vanessa's voice floating from the kitchen. She'd left her phone on speaker, sitting on the counter. The voice was cold and businesslike. If she signs off on everything, the rest is just a matter of time. Before I could call out, the line went dead. I assumed she meant a work deal, trying to shut down the nagging suspicion. Then, a week before the party, the junk mail arrived. An expensive, glossy brochure from a private residential facility called Silver Pines Residence. My name was printed neatly on the mailing label. Inside, there was a handwritten note not from me, but tucked into the pages mentioning a suggested room number and the words, family, pre-selected. My stomach clenched. Pre-selected. By whom? Even Maple, my old tabby cat, became part of the unnerving pattern. Vanessa insisted on taking her to a pet spa for a weekend. Maple returned 2 days later, smelling of expensive floral shampoos, but her eyes were wide, red, and strange. She hid under the sofa for hours. It was a small thing, but it added to the chilling feeling that my home, my life, was slowly being taken over, controlled down to the smallest creature. Alone one night, I opened the folder of documents Stephen had rushed me through. I read slowly this time, tracing the fine print. There it was, vague and devastating. In the event of cognitive decline, the sole right to property transfer decisions falls to the designated representative. My trust, the unquestioning trust in my son, was being leveraged against me. The birthday party itself was a massive anomaly, a reserved private room in a high-end restaurant, and Vanessa had generously invited every last relative from my late husband's side, people Stephen usually complained were too much trouble and drama. I felt happy, yes, but also puzzled. This wasn't Stephen's style. Later, a little tipsy on the single glass of champagne I'd allowed myself, my niece, Kathy, leaned in and slurred. Aunt Eleanor, Vanessa paid for the whole thing, said it was an investment in the future. Heh. Vanessa suddenly appeared, her smile painted on, dragging Kathy away with a tight, "You've had enough, dear." And the final, terrible clue. Just before we left the house for the party, as I was waiting for Stephen to lock up, I caught a faint smell drifting up from the basement. It was acrid, like gas, or maybe some kind of solvent, not the usual dusty mildew smell. I wrinkled my nose. I think the old line is leaking again. I should call a plumber in the morning. Vanessa swept in, her designer coat rustling. "We're late." "Mom, we can worry about the leaky pipes after your birthday. Let's go." And like an obedient woman afraid of being a bother, I let her rush me out of the door, leaving the faint, sharp smell of danger behind me. Why didn't I insist? Why didn't I trust my own senses? The questions now echoed relentlessly in the locked confines of the luxury car. After the terrifying moment on the dark roadside, Stephen didn't unlock the doors. Instead, he steered the heavy SUV back onto the main freeway, heading not towards our familiar exit, but toward a wider loop of the city. I realized what he was doing, buying time, stretching the clock. Every mile we drove felt like a deliberate tear in the fabric of my safe, predictable life. Outside, the night was cold. Faint snowflakes were just beginning to dust the streetlights, each flash of light mirroring the frantic beat inside my chest. "Mom." "Listen," Stephen began, his voice barely a rasp. "When Vanessa asked me to print those medical forms a few weeks ago, I made copies. Just an old habit from running my own business. You know, never trust a single printout." He confessed he'd started looking through them after he overheard the phone call. It wasn't just power of attorney. He found a draft petition to the courts to declare me cognitively incapacitated, citing Dr. Hawkins's slow response assessment. Worse, he found a signed deposit contract for Silver Pines residence with my move-in date set for the week after my birthday. "I heard the rest of the call last night," he said, his gaze fixed on the rushing traffic. "Vanessa was talking to Martin Clay, that lawyer. She said, if an incident happens at her house tomorrow night, don't worry. We have the full medical file showing her memory decline. The gas system is old." I blinked, trying to track the timeline. Last night, Incident. Tomorrow night. My birthday. Stephen slammed his palm lightly against the steering wheel. I truly thought she was just being harsh. Pushing me to do the dirty work of getting you into a home. I've always let Vanessa handle the messy side of the money. I just focused on the coding, the clean transactions, conflict avoidance. It's what I do. Then came the real turning point, the confession that shook the floor of the car. But this morning, it didn't sit right. I logged into the smart security camera system I installed for you, the one Vanessa insisted on. I checked the basement feed. Around 3 a.m. Mum, someone went down there. I saw the gas valve being turned. My breathing hitched. I remembered the smell. The faint, acrid scent I dismissed as old pipes. The camera feed cut out 5 minutes after, but I got a blurry glimpse. A man in a dark jacket and a baseball cap. He didn't look like a plumber. Mum, he looked like an intruder. Stephen grabbed his phone, unlocked it, and showed me a screenshot. It was an email from Vanessa's personal account to lawyer Clay. The subject line was chillingly casual Marsh Estate. The body read, "If the incident occurs tomorrow evening, we must file the paperwork before anyone can ask questions." The world shrank to the smell of expensive leather and the cold dread of realizing my own home was rigged. I started to shiver, not from the cold of the night, but from the realization that I was running not just from betrayal, but from murder. My 68 years felt impossibly fragile. I've been standing on the sidelines for years, letting my wife manage everything. "Handle you," Stephen admitted, his voice cracking with self-disgust. I was a silent accomplice. Mum, I'm only just waking up now, driving away from my own home with my mother, trying to keep her alive. He pulled the car off the highway ramp, taking us back toward the neighborhood. But slowly, tentatively, I have another system, a private, redundant camera network connected to my cloud. She doesn't know about it. Rich people always have a backup for their backup. He looked at me, his eyes finally meeting mine, desperate and pleading. "We can park far away. We can watch. We can see what happens if Eleanor Marsh doesn't come home exactly when they planned." I had a choice again, a massive, terrifying choice. To believe this frightened, suddenly remorseful man my distant, rich son, or to believe that the world was still normal, that this was all paranoia. I looked at the dark suburban streets ahead, thinking of that sweet, poisonous smell I'd ignored. I made my decision. My voice was a low, steady whisper. "All right, son. Tonight." We watched to see who was really wishing me a happy birthday. Stephen killed the engine and the headlights. The black SUV became a heavy, opaque box of silence parked at the far end of my street, 200 feet from my small, dark house. The only illumination came from a street lamp that flickered erratically, casting long, nervous shadows. Beside us sat a battered white utility van I'd never seen before, its windows tinted deep black. Stephen immediately brought up the private security app on his phone. This was his hidden layer, the one Vanessa didn't know about. The image was grainy, black and white, but clear enough. The back door of my house, the one leading straight to the kitchen, was slightly ajar. "Look," Stephen breathed, his finger shaking as he pointed at the screen. 2 dark shapes, 2 men in black jackets, baseball caps, and gloves. Slipped inside. One carried a small metallic gauge or device, the other had a small metal can. They moved with a chilling professional calm, like exterminators or utility workers performing a routine service. I stared at the screen. An out-of-body experience. I was watching my own death being prepared. My hand instinctively went to my throat, clutching the thin gold chain that held my husband's wedding ring, a physical reminder that I was still here, still breathing. Stephen switched the feed to an indoor angle, a hidden camera in the basement. We watched the man with the gauge, the same one Stephen saw in the 3A clip, methodically twist the main gas valve further open. The other man calmly placed a small, simple timer device into a nearby electrical outlet. Then he moved upstairs, out of view, only to reappear moments later in the frame of the living room window, spraying something onto the curtains from the metal can. A flammable accelerant. The calculation was brutally simple. If I had come home on time, gone into the living room, turned on a lamp, perhaps the little gas stove to make my habitual cup of herbal tea, any spark from a switch, any flick of a pilot light, and the gas-soaked house would have simply detonated. The news would report it as a tragic accident due to old, leaking pipes. A black Mercedes, Vanessa's car, pulled up slowly at the corner of the block. She stepped out, wearing a dark trench coat and sunglasses, even in the dead of night. She pretended to be out for a stroll, walking past the house, glancing quickly. She tapped something rapidly on her phone, then walked on, disappearing around the bend. She was triggering the timer, verifying the fuse was lit. They were going to kill me, I whispered, the words tasting like rust. My son's wife, my family. Stephen swore under his breath, reaching for his own phone. I'm calling 911, right now. I grabbed his arm, hard. No, don't. Stephen. Think. My mind, honed by decades of critical care nursing, was suddenly clear and sharp. If 911 arrives, what do they find? An absent old woman, a leaky gas system, and medical records that say I'm suffering from cognitive decline. Who do you think they're going to suspect if the explosion doesn't happen? Me. They'll say I was too confused to handle my pipes. We had to prevent the explosion without revealing I knew the exact mechanism. Stephen hesitated for a heartbeat, then nodded, understanding the impossible legal trap. He quickly opened a secure chat app, a direct, non-emergency line his company used for city government contracts and utilities. He typed furiously, "I'm sending an anonymous report," he said, his voice low and tight. A neighbour, just a concerned citizen, saw two strangers near the utility access, smelled gas, and saw a white van. They're dispatching the fire department under the guise of an unverified gas leak. Within 5 minutes, the streetlights were drowned out by flashing red and white. A large fire truck and a smaller utility van screeched to a halt outside my house. Firefighters moved quickly, focusing on the basement access. They shut off the main valve, collected the suspicious timer, and documented the smell. They worked fast, efficiently, and discreetly, just as Stephen had orchestrated. Then, the final, crushing tableau. Vanessa's black Mercedes reappeared, speeding up the street. She stopped, put on a brilliant show of panic, jumping out of the car, hands covering her mouth. She rushed toward the fire chief, pretending to be the distraught daughter-in-law. But I saw her, from the safety of the dark SUV. I watched her eyes as she glanced at the still-standing house, at the utility workers removing the timer, for a fraction of a second, before she could plaster on a horrified expression. A flicker of pure, ice-cold disappointment crossed her face. It was the sight of a plan failed, a financial acquisition delayed. That fraction of a second was enough. It was the moment something inside me snapped, something beyond grief or fear. The blind, hopeful, unconditional love and trust I had for the idea of family died right there, on my 68th birthday. The shift from victim to detective felt strange, but exhilarating. I was an old-school nurse, used to charting vitals and tracking medications, not tracking digital footprints. Thankfully, Stephen and Nora were experts in their fields, and together, we became a formidable, if unlikely, team. Stephen put his tech skills to use immediately. He still maintained residual administrative access to his old company's server, which Vanessa often used for personal financial dealings. He dug through the email logs and found the dedicated burner account Vanessa was using to communicate with Clay and the Silver Pines facility. The correspondence was a roadmap of greed, detailing schedules and payoff structures. Meanwhile, Nora got to work on the legal front. Her first move was a quiet, temporary injunction, filed with a trusted judge, to suspend all existing powers of attorney until I could get an independent mental competency review. It was done ex parte, without notifying the opposing parties, citing my immediate danger. We can't let them start moving things until we prove you're sound. Eleanor, Nora explained, emphasizing the urgent need for discretion. I was driven to the University of Colorado's neurological department, where a team of independent specialists put me through rigorous memory tests. This time, there was no Dr. Hawkins cutting me off. The atmosphere was calm, professional. After hours of assessment, the conclusion was clear: I was fully lucid, entirely capable of managing my affairs, with only minor signs of anxiety, which they attributed to the recent stress. The cognitive decline was a complete fabrication, to catch them in the act. Stephen came up with a clever bit of digital counter-surveillance. Vanessa had given me a new phone a few weeks ago, one she insisted I keep at home for emergencies. She thought it was sitting on my bedside table, gathering dust. In reality, Stephen had secretly sideloaded a robust recording application onto it, and the phone was now tucked securely in Nora's briefcase. It was set to record every time Vanessa or Clay called my number, expecting the confused old lady to answer. A call came in late that afternoon. Vanessa was clearly agitated by the failure of the gas incident. Martin, I don't care about the fire department. They found nothing. Her voice, tinny and cold, was captured perfectly. We need to move faster. Is there a way to push that staircase fall accident before the old woman decides to change the will? Or worse, talk to someone? Her words were casual, discussing murder as if she were ordering lunch. Nora then deployed a private investigator to track down the man in the baseball cap from Stephen's basement camera footage. It turned out he was a freelance security consultant with a history of being investigated for sabotaging security systems and staging fake break-ins for insurance fraud. The pieces of the criminal conspiracy were rapidly falling into place. Stephen remotely accessed the backup cloud storage and extracted the surveillance video. It was slightly blurry, but undeniable: the technician twisting the gas valve and setting the timer. This footage, combined with the technician's potential testimony, formed the backbone of the criminal case. My own nursing instincts kicked in for the final piece of the puzzle. Nora, check my prescriptions, I urged. I think there might be drugs added. I suspected they were using medication to reinforce the image of a forgetful, muddled old woman. The pharmacy records confirmed my suspicion. Vanessa had been regularly picking up my prescriptions and, on 2 occasions, had signed for a powerful sedative that I had never taken and my primary doctor had never prescribed. This opened a critical avenue, the charge of intentional impairment of cognitive function, with sufficient raw evidence emails, the surveillance video, the drug receipts, and the audio recording. Nora decided it was time for the final, risky step. Stage 2, getting Vanessa and Clay to confess their true intentions by making them believe I was ready to surrender. The lure was simple. I would agree to move to Silver Pines and sign away the last of my independence to make things tidy. Vanessa received the message from me, or rather, from Nora, carefully crafted in my voice, a weary invitation to lunch. It claimed I was finally ready to discuss moving into the nursing home, that I didn't want to be a burden anymore. The perfect bait. Nora had chosen a quiet Italian restaurant downtown, booking a secluded private room. What Vanessa and Clay didn't know was that the room was now under temporary court order, fitted with discreet cameras and highly sensitive microphones, sanctioned by the local police. I arrived first, playing the role of the frail, slightly confused matriarch. I wore a drab, old cardigan, buttoned deliberately wrong, and spoke a little slower than usual, occasionally feigning a pause to recall a simple word. Vanessa and Martin Clay walked in, all smiles and practiced sympathy. Their smug expressions confirmed they thought their old lady losing her mind narrative was entirely secure. Lawyer Clay, sleek and predatory, opened his leather briefcase, pulling out a fresh stack of documents I was supposed to sign quickly before admission. Just a few final waivers. Eleanor, he said with a paternalistic sigh. To keep things smooth and simple for Stephen, Nora, introduced simply as a neutral financial advisor I had consulted, leaned forward slightly. Before we finalize, perhaps Mrs. Marsh should state her final wishes one last time, just to avoid any post-signing disputes. This was my cue. Following Nora's careful script, I began rambling vaguely. It's just, I keep thinking about that night, my birthday. I thought I smelled gas, but I forgot to turn it off. I was so lucky I didn't go straight home, wasn't I? My house could have just exploded. Vanessa immediately jumped in, her composure momentarily ruffled. Oh, Mom, don't worry about that old thing. It was just the old pipes. I told you. There's nothing to see there. Nora smoothly shifted gears, targeting the core motivation. She deliberately mentioned Silver Pines. That facility is incredibly costly. I don't know if Stephen's budget can truly sustain that, even with his good income. It's quite a drain on family finances. Vanessa let out a short, dismissive laugh. The bait was taken. Oh, it'll be fine, she drawled, a thin, cold smile spreading across her face. Once everything is legally in Stephen's name, we'll be fully covered. We just need the court to formally declare that she's, well, not mentally competent enough to control her finances. And then we're golden. Clay visibly stiffened, trying to rein his client in, but Nora pressed on, accidentally feeding Vanessa's ego. Ah, so the cognitive assessment is complete. I just hear sometimes that people of this age often have sudden, unexpected accidents even before the courts can rule. This was too much for Vanessa to resist. She lowered her voice, eager to prove she was ahead of the curve, showing off her ruthlessness. It should have been finished on her birthday. She boasted, a hint of genuine cruelty in her eyes. A little gas leak. A little spark. Everyone cries for a couple of weeks, and life moves on. But somehow. She paused, shrugging dismissively. Someone didn't stick to the plan and go home. I fought to keep my expression vague, keeping my voice shaky and small. Are you saying if I had gone home that night, I would have been dead? Vanessa realized her slip. Her face went pale under her makeup. She forced a hollow, desperate laugh. Oh, Mum, I was just making an example. Nobody would actually arrange something like that. It's like a movie. Right. But it was too late. The cameras had recorded every word. The hidden microphone had picked up every chilling laugh and every casual confession. The trap was sprung. Vanessa was still reeling from her confession, desperately trying to backtrack. When I made my move, I smoothly rotated my body, pulling the collar of my old cardigan down just enough to expose the thin gold chain, my husband's ring, and the tiny, almost invisible microphone clipped to it. My face, moments ago clouded with feigned confusion, hardened into an expression of cold, unwavering control. Nora tapped the table twice a sharp, quick signal. The door to the private dining room burst open. 2 uniformed police officers stepped inside, badges gleaming under the soft Italian lighting. They introduced themselves, presented a temporary arrest warrant, and read the charges: conspiracy to commit murder and elder financial abuse. Vanessa shot out of her chair, screaming. This is a setup. This is the plot of a confused old woman and her traitor son. Just then, Stephen, who had been waiting at a nearby table as planned, walked in. He looked tired, but resolute. No, Vanessa, he said, his voice calm amidst her hysteria. This is reality. He confirmed to the officers and Nora that he had supplied the crucial video evidence, email transcripts, and the identity of the gas technician. Lawyer Clay tried to remain composed, clearing his throat. This is nonsense. She was clearly joking. Out of context. Overly dramatic dialogue. Nora didn't even look at him. She held up her evidence file and rattled off the proof, the audio recording of Vanessa describing the gas leak and a spark, the signed deposit contract for Silver Pines, the fraudulent court petition declaring me incompetent, and the detailed records of the illegal commission the nursing home promised Clay for securing my property. I stood up, pushing off the table slightly. This was the moment for my truth, not Nora's legal maneuvering. My voice was slow, deliberate, and perfectly clear. You calculated the gas volume in my kitchen. You calculated the timing, I said, looking directly at Vanessa and Clay. But you forgot one thing: I spent my entire working life breathing in hospital chemicals and surgical disinfectant. I recognized the smell of death from a mile away. Vanessa was handcuffed, still hurling accusations at Stephen, claiming he would lose everything for turning against her. Stephen simply met her gaze, his expression empty of emotion. If everything is built on killing my mother, he replied, a profound sense of closure in his voice. I don't need it. The scene quickly shifted to the police station. The baseball-capped technician, apprehended shortly after the restaurant raid, cracked immediately. He confessed to being hired by lawyer Clay to check the gas lines and install the timer, detailing how he was paid in cash in the parking garage beneath Clay's office building. Forensic technical teams swarmed my house. The timer device and traces of the flammable solvent were retrieved and confirmed. The report stated unequivocally that this was no random leak. The press, sniffing the potent air of scandal, a rich tech executive's wife plotting to murder his working-class mother for assets, started circling. At the initial court hearing, Nora presented the mountain of evidence. She successfully petitioned the court to temporarily freeze all joint assets between Stephen and Vanessa to prevent any attempt at liquidation. More importantly, the court issued a final order protecting me from any coercive decisions regarding my health or housing. The judge, a serious-faced woman who had listened to the recordings with mounting horror, looked down at me. "Mrs. Marsh," she stated, her voice echoing in the courtroom. "You appear to be far more competent than many people in this room, effective immediately. You are the sole decision-maker regarding your home and your health." The revenge wasn't just sweet, it was meticulously legal, and it had only just begun. The formal trial began several months later, a brutal and meticulously documented affair. The gas technician, seeking a reduced sentence, took the stand and detailed exactly how he was instructed by Clay to create an accident. Then came my testimony. Standing on the witness stand, I spoke in a steady, even voice, without a single tear. The courtroom was utterly silent as I described the feeling of being trapped in that SUV, hearing Stephen say, "Don't go home tonight, Mom," and realizing my 68th birthday was the date marked for my death. Stephen also testified. He was not criminally charged, but he confessed his gross negligence and moral responsibility for enabling Vanessa, acknowledging that he had allowed his mother to be put in danger. His company and public reputation were irrevocably damaged. The sentences were handed down swiftly. Vanessa received a lengthy prison term for conspiracy and attempted murder. Lawyer Martin Clay was disbarred and sentenced to prison. The Silver Pines residence facility, found to have a history of illegal kickbacks for acquiring property-rich elderly clients, was shut down pending further investigation. My final act of legal revenge took place immediately afterward, in Nora Beck's small, quiet office. I signed my new will. My house and assets were not distributed to any future in-laws. Instead, they were funneled into the Harbourlight Trust, a new foundation dedicated to protecting the elderly from financial abuse, with Nora as its chief legal guardian. For Stephen, I didn't cut him off entirely, but the terms were clear. He was granted a modest amount, just enough to start over with the explicit legal provision that all future decisions involving me must be in writing, permanently eliminating the phrase, "I thought it was best for Mom." I sold the old Lakewood house, filled with too many sad and terrifying memories. This time, I made the decision entirely on my own terms. I moved into a small, cooperative retirement apartment, a place filled with former labourers, nurses, and miners people who understood the meaning of self-reliance. On my next birthday, a year later, I baked a simple apple pie. I invited Nora, a few new neighbours, and Stephen. He arrived alone, with a small, unassuming bouquet of flowers, no big envelope of money. Midway through the simple meal, he offered his first real apology, one that wasn't wrapped in an excuse. I didn't immediately forgive him, nor did I embrace him tearfully. I just nodded. Forgiveness is something I do for myself, not for you, Stephen, I told him. But from now on, everything between us will be built on you showing up, not on the money you send. Late that night, I stood alone on my tiny balcony, looking out at the distant shimmer of the Denver skyline. I lightly touched the faint, almost invisible scar on my neck where the microphone chain had rubbed during the confession lunch. The sound of that car door, locking the sharp clack on my birthday night, echoed in my memory. This time, I allowed myself a faint smile. They thought they had me locked inside a gas house, I thought. But I was the one who locked them out of my life, behind the door of my last will and testament. The lights in my apartment dimmed, leaving a small, elderly silhouette, no longer a victim, but a survivor who had personally redefined the meaning of family and revenge. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to hear where you are tuning in from. So drop a comment below and share your thoughts. If you want to hear more raw family drama stories, make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary. Hit that like button, and feel free to press the hype button to make sure this video gets heard by more folks.